All right, so welcome to another wonderful day of responsive web design. Um, we're just going to get started on a little code pen, of course, super blank. Before I get started, though, I wanted to address some good learnings that I've had. Obviously, we've been using Git and specifically GitHub to get projects up. And obviously, we, I don't know, based on the pull requests I'm seeing, not everybody's wanting feedback or making pull requests. We're missing about like 30 on average every day. I'm just wondering if people are not submitting pull requests or if there's a problem with understanding Git. And I wanted to just basically put a plug in for Git because really, let me tell you how the real world works. Every day of your life, you're making so many Git requests. And so this is something you need to master now. If you don't master it now, then when you go into an interview or when they'll say, hey, can you give us a link to your Git repo? Or you'll go in and talk to people, interview, and they say, okay, tell us how you use your Git flow. And all of a sudden you're going, oh my gosh, I had totally skipped that. So you need to focus on your Git as much as you focus on your code until Git is like speaking HTML. Like you need to have that kind of grasp on it. I also want to say that you don't have to use the terminal. You don't have to use Git Bash. You can use whatever the heck you want. Go find a tool that you feel comfortable with and then master that tool. There's no reason. The reason that we introduce things with terminals because it's free and easy to use as far as accessibility. But I personally love to use a program called Tower, but it costs like $80. But that $80 saves me hundreds and thousands of dollars in time lost when I'm trying to find a terminal. So Git Kraken's legit. I think the best one that's free, in my opinion, is SourceTree. So anyway, that's just some stuff that I feel like just based on the pull requests. Oh, Patrick, you're being a programmer, showing off your GitHub history. And so we have to actually just pay attention to that. Like I'm looking at our request and I'm going, I want to make sure that everybody understands this is very important for your professional life, probably as much as anything else you're learning. So that's just a little plug to pay attention to your pull requests. Make it a goal of yours to, as soon as you get the fork, like you fork it, you clone it, and you start working on it, make a pull request that instant, because then you have a channel already opened up. And all you have to do is push that push button instead of having to do all that stuff. So I would challenge you all that when you get the challenge today, well, you already have it, by the way. We'll talk about the end of day, but get that stuff up there and open up that channel so the TAs can at least have some way to communicate with you. Anyway, there's the plug for Git. Remember that Git is not GitHub. GitHub is just an interface that we're using. We're using the technology of Git for version control. So I just want to make sure that's clear. You might go to a company and they use Bitbucket or GitLab or many other properties of GUI. So just keep that in mind. All right. So thank you all for going through for those of you that did go through that little 10-minute exercise. Hopefully it got the brain going as far as to what we need to do in the future. Obviously, maybe not your future. I'll be having much better videos and where the solution isn't done in the second exercise. LOL, my bad. So, oh man, I'm human, as you very well know. So what we're going to do is we're going to talk about different units. Now, we talked about REM, M, PX, there's VWs. So let's talk about some of those differences right now. So I'm just going to go in here and we'll just have an H1 and we'll just, we'll say this is PX. Okay. This is M, this is rem, and this is VW. And so what we'll need to do is obviously the containing class kind of is a big deal. And that's why I want to write this out with you and not just have it ready. I wanted to like write this with you and like let it just sink in. It's really important to understand. The discussion really starts with accessibility, okay? Like hard of seeing and people that use the internet that are getting older or people that have been blind but they can see a little bit. There's this huge spectrum of accessibility that we want to write for the internet. And so it's really hard. It's like your audience. What is the audience that you're writing for? Well, you're writing for people and hopefully, you know, millions of people if your website's that big. So accessibility is something just to keep in the back of your mind. So let's do, we'll do pixel container. All right. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to have a container around each of these, and we'll talk about why that's important. And get rid of this JavaScript thing. So PX, they're actually more confusing than you would think. If you were to go look up the unit of measure for a pixel, it's actually way more complicated than the average developer thinks. I think the average developer thinks a pixel is equivalent to 1 pixel on the screen, and based on the resolution, that pixel changes. But that's just not the case. And so, I mean, let's go look at it. It's kind of crazy. The W3 pixel definition. Oh man, definition. Autocomplete's just made us all horrible spellers. Oh, where is it? Like this one, even right here, is not. PX are relative to the viewing device. For low DPI device, 1 PX in one device of pixel of dot display. That is just not true. Like, so that kind of makes me sad. But at the same time, it's a great way of thinking about it. So the original unit of measure, if you can find it on Wikipedia or something, it's crazy. But for us, 1 PX makes sense because designers use it. So designers say, this thing is 10 pixels wide. And so that 10 pixels is relative to the viewport. It really is. It does grow with it. And so for us, it's really simple and easy to grasp what a pixel is because we've been using those units forever. Now, other units were introduced. By the way, these are not all the units, but these are the most important ones for what we're going to be doing in our modern web right now. So M's are a unit from typography, right? So if you did the reading, this is review, but we're going to actually do some practical stuff with it today. So that's why we're doing this. But the M is allowing us to change its value based on the actual font size. So these are based on font size. Pixels are based on the viewport dots, as we just said. And then rems, these are called root M's. These are based on the root HTML font size. Okay. And you might be going, well, why does that matter? Well, we'll talk about that. VWs are based on the viewport, the size of the viewport. Okay, so let's go enable these right now. So pixel container, we'll do M container, we will do rem container, and we will do VW container. All right, so what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna grab pixel container. Man, never type it, always copy and paste because you could have your own typos. All right, sorry, bear with me on this one. I thought it'd be great to type it out, but now I'm kind of having regrets because there's so much dumb stuff. Okay, and now we have our VW container. Yes, this is where I should have started. My bad. So under the pixels, we're going to say font size 14 px, okay? And then we're going to go and we're just going to do this on every one of these things. All right, so notice that we already have a little change going on with all these px's. Nothing's going to change because we don't have like the m's in here. So let's go put in. This is going to be ridiculous at first, okay? But I need everybody to see this. Or sorry, rem and then vw. So if we use the same measure of units, the same number, I should say, look how drastically different all these things. So this is m. It's like, holy crap. This is rem. And then this is VW. Pretty crazy. So obviously there's a big difference, right, between pixels, M's, REMs, and VW. I just wanted to show you that if you use the same number, these are drastically different. And that is because 1M is equivalent to whatever the value is set to. So for example, if we set the font size on our H1 to 14 pixels, it's going to match. So we have 1M right here. So now 1M is equivalent to whatever we set. So this is the hard thing, is it is whatever we set. So if we say font size on the H1 is 1M, notice how it just dropped right there, right? Because this font size doesn't have a declaration as big as what we were doing up here. So now what we can do is on the, and it goes off of like the pixel font size, like it goes off of the parent's font size. So let's check this out. This is why M's are a little bit hard to deal with, because it goes off of the font size declared in pixels, and then it's relative to itself. So check this out. It's just wild. 16px of the M container. So M container right here, I'm setting it to font size 16px. That means that this H1 is going to take that font size. Woo! And this font size is being set off of its parent's font size. And so it's super confusing. And so what happens is we have to use M's based on relative spacing. Now this sounds pretty cool initially if you're trying to do if everything was to grow and expand off of itself forever, then M's are pretty cool. But because they're controlled by font size, it's kind of it's a hard unit to live by, because it's font size. It's not the pixel size or the size of the viewport. It's based on font. And so if somebody were to upgrade or update their reader on their computer, then the whole site would grow based on the font size. And we're going to do that together shortly. Right now, if I set the font size on this H1 to 2M, it doubles in size, okay? And 3M triples in size. So it goes up based off the original unit that it's been given. And so it's really tricky. And so for a while, the whole internet, about a couple years ago, actually, the whole internet, including myself, switched over to M's. And we were using M's for everything. And the reason we weren't using anything else is because we were like, hey, it's responsive to the web browser's font size. But now web browsers have changed. So I'm going to hit Control+ on my screen. And it's going to zoom in. Notice that the pixel, this is px, is also zooming, right? So a couple years ago, this didn't exist in the browser. Like you couldn't just magically zoom in your browser. And so those that are hard of seeing can very easily now zoom in to the browser, and the browser auto adjusts. So now it's like, well, what's the point of M's if pixels do that now? Well, there still is a point. We'll talk about it shortly. But I just wanted to show you that as you zoom, notice that the M's don't increase because we're not actually increasing the font size of the browser. Okay, so you're going, man, this is kind of confusing. It is. M's are pretty confusing. And maybe I did a bad job of explaining them because they're so confusing. But understand that 1M is equal to the font size set on that element. Okay? And then if you don't have a font size set on this element, then it goes to the element above it and gets the font size. So if we change this font size to like 30, it's taking that 30 and then increasing it with its own value. So it's a little confusing. Let's move down to rems for a second. Rems took the confusion of relative units out and said, you know what we're going to do? We're going to go off of the HTML level. So let's go grab our HTML tag, and let's say font size. We'll say 30px. Okay, and then of course we have to drop 14 rems because that's just silly. And so there's our rem right there. Okay. So notice that, let's go and let's change our m so that everything's equal to 1 of itself. Notice how 1m is this small versus 1 rem is this big, right? Because it's going off of the root or the HTML font size. Now this is more dependable because then we can use the rem in many different ways, like margin and padding, and we know that we're always going to have the same font size until somebody with accessibility issues goes and changes the font. Then your whole site blows up again. So it's kind of frustrating, but it's something that we really need. And by the way, this wasn't supported in earlier versions of IE. And at the time, IE was very rampant when rems were introduced. So this kind of had its own problem when it was fighting IE, but now that fight's over. Internet Explorer is going away. But now we're stuck with an interesting proposition where if somebody changes the font size on their browser, your whole website blows up. So, and we're gonna literally do this together right after we finish this VW thing. So VW is a unit based on the viewport, and so it's supposed to grow with the viewport. So if I change the viewport, notice that it grows with the viewport and nothing else grows. See that? So, and then of course it is just a multiplication of that based on how many VWs you want. So really it just depends on where you're going to be using this and how are you going to be using fonts. If you have a site that is like made for distributing fonts or looking at fonts and it's a really heavy typography experience, you know, you're going to probably want to look at M or VW or M. But if you're looking at building like a layout for an app or something, you know, PX could be a great choice. And so based on the article I showed you, and you go read that later if you haven't read it, basically the premise was, look, you have to use the right units at the right time. So what is that? Well, let's do some experiments together. And so follow along with me. I'm going to give you this link. So VW, I've actually never used a negative VW, actually. Let's try that. Nope, looks like it breaks it. You can't like go negative viewport view window. Okay, everybody get that link up. And then I'll answer some of the questions. While you're doing that, let me answer some questions. Richard, so don't use M or M. No, that's not what I'm saying. I'm saying let's look at this a little bit further before we make a decision. What proportion for the viewport is a VW font, if that even makes sense? It's based off of the viewport. So if the viewport's big or small, that's the proportion. So yeah, I don't know if there's like an actual number. Ronnie's saying 1%. They're a newer unit and they have limitations as well as far as like what you can do with them. But like I said, if you have a website that needs to do something like this, like if the screen needs to get bigger and the font needs to get bigger, VWs are a great choice. But only for text. Let me talk about that. And so Russell made a comment. One issue I've noticed with VW is not all browsers behave the same way. Exactly. Okay, so let's talk about, like, we just did the Zoom thing, right? So now that you have this up, go ahead, and if you're on a Mac, it's going to be Command. If you're on a PC, it's going to be Control. hit that and then hit the plus symbol on your keyboard. Just go ahead and do this with me. So you'll notice that all of these units are basically maintaining their integrity and growing, right? And so this is really a case against using anything but pixels. Like if you just look at people using Zoom, but not everybody uses Zoom. That's just not reality. It's not the world we live in. They actually go in, like you could have somebody that like me. If my vision was a lot worse, I'd probably have my default font setting much higher. So let's go do that together. If you're not in Chrome, this is going to be rough. So get in Chrome, or just watch. But if you're following along, this is actually really fascinating. So go ahead and go up to your Chrome settings. So I'm just going to go to settings, go to font size. And what I want you to do is, oh man, this is going to be hard for me because of the screen share. But I'm going to pop this out so you've just lost view of it. But what I'm going to do, well, let me pop it back in and show you what I'm going to do. I'm actually going to take my font size. So I just went into customize fonts. Let me do that again because it probably didn't show up. So customize fonts, click. And then I'm going to be dragging this bar a little bit. Remember where you had it, just in case you don't want to have your browser set that all the time. So now I'm going to take this out, and I want everybody to do this with me. So drag, I'm going to take my font size up to huge, and then take it out. Okay, so everybody, now let's go to espn.com. Just everybody go. We'll do this together, and we're going to change our font size and see what happens on their website. So as you can see, I'm taking my font to tiny. Nothing's happening except for the top bar. So you see this top bar up here, this is changing. So now I'm going to go to huge. See how it's busting out? Like it's doing some weird stuff. But notice that ESPN themselves, one of the biggest syndicates of sports news, don't give a crap about responsive units. So it's pretty frustrating if you're hard of seeing. But what they have done is they've allowed you, so if you hit Control Plus, notice that the font grows, right? And so there's multiple ways to attack this problem. In this case, they've used a combination of M's and PX's to basically just grow with the website. But they are overriding the default font for the browser. So notice that I'm on like really big, and this stuff changes, but clearly nothing else here was listening to it. Okay, so let's go to somewhere where accessibility would matter, like the White House. The White House.gov. So let me give you that link. All right. So now we have this font size, and I'm going to increase it to medium. Okay, look at that. So now the White House, who's trying to be super accessible and use units that allow us to do that, we've increased the font. Now let's go to huge. Okay. Do you think that you could actually navigate this website with huge font all the time? It's just not realistic. And so the hard thing I have with the zealots of these kind of units of measure is the reality that we live in, that designers are not thinking about accessibility. And so as developers, we need to think about it. But there does come a time where it's impossible to cover every possible landscape. But I think this does a really good job of, like I have my font pretty high right now. Let me show you. It's between, it's like above like the defaults. The default's here. So that's where my default is. And this is pretty big. And the White House is doing really well with it. And if I go up another tick or another tick, But it's interesting because if you go to ESPN, they don't give a rat's, right? And I guarantee more people are viewing ESPN than the White House. So these are the kind of things that you need to consider in the reality of building websites and why these things are important. Okay, so you've shown us some examples, right? Yeah, okay. I've shown you some examples. How does this really impact you as a developer? Well, the way this impacts you as a developer is that all these units can be used in different ways. But I'm going to suggest to you how to use them. But here's the problem: is it's my opinion. So, and I don't want to get into that dogmatic, like, oh, this is the only thing. So you need to make your own opinions based on knowledge and reading and logic. But in my knowledge, reading, and logic, I've found that the use of rems is especially awesome for font sizes, and M's are especially awesome if you have a piece of technology that needs to be super responsive, and it's like a component that needs to grow and expand on the insides and outsides. But by the way, that is hyper rare. It's super rare that I even touch M's. Pixels are awesome to maintain sanity while you're developing, because you know what to expect when you say 14 pixels because the designer said 14 pixels. So my general rule of thumb is layouts, like layout pieces like margin and padding, are going to be pixels and percents. We're going to talk about percents after this. And then font is going to be rems. So that to me is like a really good happy medium right now. VWs are so wildly different that I just don't touch them right now. So for me, I don't like VWs. I don't like M's for a lot of things, but I like it for some things. I like pixels for layout things. So padding, margin, and then percent is what I prefer for everything else as far as width. So for pixels and for fonts, rem is the winner for me, because I can at least say, here's my font size and I'm good to go. Now there's a couple articles that have some really cool things where you can actually change the percent of your rem based on the user's settings. Okay, so like the things that we just did with that font update. Make sure, by the way, right now, go zero out your settings again. Otherwise, you're going to have a horrible time. So if you're on this page, hit Control-0 if you're on a PC and Command-0, so it's zeroed out. Go back to your font settings and change those back to what you want, because I would hate for this lesson to have ruined your life as far as accessibility goes. So that is, in a nutshell, these units. When we start using these units like crazy, though, is when you start living in projects. And here's the rub. It's the same thing every time, but whatever standard you're going to be working in, you have to at least have a general knowledge of what these things do. And then usually you're going to be given, a couple of days to onboard and figure out how they use them. And so really that's why I want to just give you an exploratory look at these things and then let you make your own decisions based on the articles I sent. I wanted to send articles that maybe even I didn't agree with. I wanted to make sure that they were more current and had some really good thoughts in them. So especially the article, let's see, especially the article with the more reading. I thought that was, or the more, I'm going to get it right now. That's why I'm, this guy, let me go get this one. So just use pixels. I don't really agree with that, but then if you read it, he talks about how each one of these has their own issue. And he actually comes to the same kind of conclusion that I had, which is, however, most importantly, pixels make working with designers day-to-day easier. Pixels provide a shared language between the worlds of developer and designer. This shared language makes it easy. Like, that is why this makes it easy for us to do. Now, when I used M's, I just had a little converter on my machine, and I would just say, okay, what does 1M equal if I have 16 font? Because trying to do those maths, it's horrible. Those links they're pinned. I'll put this one here just since we're talking about it. but they're pinned to the discussion. All these links, by the way, they're all going to go into our training kit, and we'll put them in there again. So everybody will have like the Bible of Lambda soon. Aaron asks, so why again do you like REM? I like REM because I know it's exactly what you said, consistency. I know it's going to be this font every time, every day of the week. One of the really cool things, there's a article from Snook. It's Jonathan Snook? Can't remember his name. This guy wrote this back in like 2011, I think. Or 2004. I don't even know. This guy he's amazing though. And one of the things he suggests is to put in font size 62.5%. And what that does is the default browser. Oops. This is actually really cool. Wow. Copying and pasting even today, guys. Oh my gosh. All right. So what this does is it takes the default browser's actual pixel size and turns it, and usually it's 16, by the way. So if you've never touched your browser settings, you've never messed with anything, they come pre-shipped at 16px as the base font, like for everything. Just in case you didn't know that, the more you know, right? And so what happens is if 62.5% translates that if you're using one rem, it actually equals 10px, which is kind of funny. So this one right here, rem container, this is actually 10 pixels. And so that makes your life so much easier, because now if you do 1.5 rem, you're getting 15 pixels, right? Based off of this font size on the browser at 62.5%. And the coolest thing is accessibility. People might go, well, what if people change their font size? Well, because you're using a percentage of the root, it will actually update the font size based on that percent, and it'll scale perfectly. So that is why REMs are the best for font typography, in my opinion. But my opinion may be wrong, but I've been using it and it works really well for me. So REMs for typography, pixels for everything else, and then M's when you need to snipe something that's super responsive. That is the gospel of Josh right now, and it could change with the more I learn, but that's where I am right now, and I found that it's worked really well for me. So what I want us to do is actually use REMs. So part of the challenge we're going to have today is to utilize REMs and just to see how they function. And I would recommend that we actually use font size 62.5% in your root, because it just equals 16 if you don't have anything else set. So, man, this whole conversation can get so heated if you talk to experienced front-end developers. Even as I say this, I kind of cringe to think about what some of my old peers would say, because some people are like, no, M's or you die. Or some people are like, pixels, bro. And it's like, oh my gosh, everybody needs to stop fighting. And so I've come to my opinions based on my experience, is that REM just makes a lot of sense if you use the 62.5%. If you don't use the 62.5%, it's basically as good as a pixel. Like, it's not really accessible. So Aaron, I would actually put it under my reset. So I would have my reset here, right? So I would do reset. Oh my gosh, reset. Okay, I'm not going to type anymore. I'm just going to never type again. Reset. So my code would go here, and then under my reset, I would introduce my font size there. Sure, yeah. I can. This is an old article, but man, this is a good one. Okay, so let me answer some questions really quick, and then we'll move on to the next topic. So Eric says, why separately? Because I want to reset everything. Remember, the reset knocks everything to 0. And so there's some really like tables and divs and margin and padding. That's why it's separate. That's going to be above it. But the font size, I want to set to 62.5% at the bottom of the reset. So that's why separate those concerns a little bit. Let's see. Let me go up here. Rain, looks like the overlap doesn't happen to me. Oh, sorry, I didn't see that when I was doing it. You might be having, you have a different browser. I get a little nervous about saying use your computer because I'm using a Mac operating system, using Chrome. If it doesn't match exactly, you could have a different experience. But in general, if you change the font size, I just wanted to show you that the font size was actually changing layout. That was the main point of that. Yeah, Windows and Chrome. So maybe Windows changes the font just a little bit differently. But you still saw the change though, right, Rain? Like you saw the font get bigger and smaller. Yeah, okay. That was the biggest point of that. And to say warning, if you build your website based on font size, you saw what happened, right? Like the White House site just blew up. So you have to be careful. But then on the flip side, ESPN just said, "Screw you, blind people." So it sucks. So we have to find that middle ground where we help everybody, because the web needs to be accessible to everybody. Okay. Any other questions about PX, M, REM, BW, Pinuendo? All right. So now what we're going to do is we're going to switch gears over to our percent-based layout. And we're going to basically look at the exercise that we talked about in the video. Some of you might have not watched the video, so this will be new to you. Those of you that did, this will be review with way more in depth though, so don't fret. I'm going to fork this because I don't want to lose what I did here. Okay. So go ahead and follow along with me. I'm going to give you exercise 1 right there. And let's open this up together. So we're going to fly through this quicker because we're all here doing a guided demo. But this is so important. Like, I can't tell you how important this is to understand the things that we're about to talk about. So if you're not paying attention, shake it off, wake up a little bit, and pay attention, because this one's really important. And by the way, the units discussion was very important on an accessibility level. On an actual practical level is also very important. But this next part, you will not be able to function and get the job done that you need to in the challenge today if you don't pay attention. That's how important this is. Okay, so we talked about getting rid of that horizontal scroll bar. And so right here it is, oh, I already have everything in. What am I doing? Well, let me start over. I forgot that I was already set up. So we have our width at 800 px, right? And we talked about this. I don't want to repeat everything I did, but this width is fixed. Therefore, our scroll bar is here, right? The scroll bar is bad news. We want fluidity. So in your last assignment, you've been using media queries, and those media queries were basically changing the layout and units of measure as you hit them, right? So if we introduced a media query at 768, everything looked really nice. The problem is until you got to 768, it looked like crap, or it didn't even change, and you just had scroll bars. And so the reality is, when we're using the browser, I don't know how you guys use the browser, but I don't full screen everything all the time. I'm usually like, maybe I'll have 2 or 3 like half screens. I'm trying to consume data. I'm trying to learn things really quickly. And so, yeah, you have to have this example because I had the solution in there. So take that one. Sorry about that. Oh yeah, Nathaniel, not everybody has that luxury. But even then, when you have multiple monitors, you might have like half of your screen. And so you just have to consider that, these scroll bars are not going to be a good experience, especially let's say you have a marketing website you're trying to make some money, and let's say somebody that's in your range of your persona, or somebody that you want, has a browser this small, like they just don't know what they're doing. They go in here and look, you might have your call to action right here, right? You might have your button that says buy now, and it's hidden because of the scroll bar. Like, that's a very real problem. And so you have to be aware of these scroll bars and understand how to get rid of them. So that is where the fluid responsive comes in. So we've talked about, we've been living in basically fixed design, like scroll bars for days, right? That was our first assignment. Then we evolved ourselves using adaptive. So adaptive is the breakpoints. That's what it was yesterday. And then today we're going to introduce adaptive plus percent. And so when you have adaptive plus percent, you actually have fully responsive web. And that's the beauty of, to me, that's like the ultimate front end craft, is that you have percents plus breakouts or breakpoints. Okay, so let's do that right now, and let's recreate this really quick. So this width right now, remember I talked about going 100%. Well, 100% is just too much, right? If I go huge, it's still too huge, and we have to constrain that. So we talked about that. It's max width that contains that. And so remember how I talked about 800px is such an important unit because it is our baseline unit that we're going to be building all of our percents off of. Now we're going to go deeper though. We're going to actually do children of children, and we're going to talk about how those percents cascade down. Okay, so if you didn't update what I just did, go ahead and do that. With 100%, max with 800px, so that you have a constrained 800px box here. But also, once we start going down, notice that there is no scroll bars happening because we have a nice percent base layout inside of here. But again, we have to do a little bit of math. So here we go. Box one. Because box and box one, I knew that I wanted to have 50%. So I wanted to have box one and box two be 50% equal. That's why I did one class here, right? If I wanted box one to be like 40% and box two to be like 30%, then I would just come down here and write those percents. This is just simple cascade, right? I don't want anybody to be confused by that. So remember that designers don't give you, at least in our current age, they don't give you files with percents built into them. That is actually changing. I've seen a couple Sketch plugins and some Photoshop things where I've seen percents being played with, but they weren't always accurate, so they were kind of scary to use. But so a designer is going to give you a document that looks more like 500px. Okay. In fact, let me, instead of like theorizing about this with you, well, I want to show you some stuff, but this is exactly what you would get, right? Like you'd get 500px. And so the problem is, like 500px, you have to figure out how to do that. Well, remember, it's actually 500px divided into the parent. All right. So to get the right percentage, we say 500 divided into 800. So 500, if you got your calculator out, divided into 800, 0.625. Okay. So let me just 0.625 is actually 625 is what that turned into, at least on my calculator. And so 0.625, you can round this up, right, to a 63% and get really close. And of course, we just move the decimal over to account for the 2 zeros, right? And so then we just go, okay, 63%. And look at that. Pretty freaking close. Like, look at that. 63,500. If I just undo what I did, it looks identical. That's how close we can get. So this actually, some people will actually ask me, how do we get pixel perfection with percent-based layouts? And I actually can guarantee pixel perfection, because if you're doing this math right, which is simple, right? You just divide 500 into 800. get the decimal, and then put it in, I mean, you're pretty much going to be 1 or 2 pixels off, and that's pixel perfection in my book. So that is the general idea that you should already have. But now, like, what if we actually start putting things down? Sure. Let me do this. We'll say parent divided by child equals the percent value. That would be the formula, Rain. Does that help? Okay. So Leon says, hey, can't you set it to 62.5? You actually can. So let's do it. 62.5%. There it is. That's probably even more accurate. But the problem when you start using floating decimals and stuff is that when you don't have a whole number, when you start to go down, you can actually you start breaking down faster if you have like a 0.5 versus if it's just 62 because of weird, float stuff. So actually, let's experiment with that in a second. Let me see if there's any other questions I can answer before I move on. Okay, Daniel says, what's an industry standard for main container initial pixels? Is it based on your target demographic? You are a very smart person. That is correct. You have to find out what is your target demographic, what resolution are they using. That's what you should be using for your container. Anecdotally, a lot of designers will say, oh, 1024, it's a laptop size, so I'm going to use that. And I'm like, oh, I don't trust you as much anymore. So make sure you're hitting your Google Analytics. Okay, you're starting a new company. Let's say you're doing your capstone project here at Lambda. How do you start then? Well, that's tougher. So that's where I'll give designers a break and say, usually it's going to be between 1200 pixels wide down to 900 pixels, depending on what you think your app demographic would be using. So if you're targeting like a laptop, like that's where you want to live, 1200. If you're more of a tablet phone app, then 800, 900 is where you want to live. So hopefully that answers your question, Daniel. Is actually 800px a standard? Or did you just mean that max width is important? I meant that max width is very important. The number itself does not matter, right? So good question, Aaron. Then Rain, okay. Perry, why round it instead of 62? Okay, we'll look at that in a second. I'll answer that in a second. Oh yeah, child parent, you're right. I was just speaking it. I don't know why I did that actually. So it's going to be the child divided into the parent. So let me update that pin value before that gets out of control. Yes, Aaron, you are correct. So this is actually really interesting. If we jumped over to less, we could introduce math, right? So we could say, and in fact, we could go even crazier, awesomer, and say at parent width, right? And we could say 800px. And then we could pop this variable right there. And then we could say at parent width divided by the number that we got from the designer, which is going to be like 600. Actually, remember, I got that backwards because never do math on live anything. So 600 divided into 800. Let's see. I wonder if I have to use my parens. I'm not really sure. That should be working. Oh, maybe it's px. No. Am I not using that operator correctly? I wonder. You should be able to do that. Let me try if it's just the normal. Maybe it's the px itself. I wonder if that's it. So if I do 800, 600. I wonder if I can just do this. I'm not sure. I'm totally guessing right now. Sorry. 600, 800. No, you should be able to do that. That's weird. Why can I not do that? And it should actually be fine with the units as well. Because, yeah, that's weird. PX should work. We could have a string. That's true. We could escape into a string. Someone go work on that and get back to us, because that's not where I wanted to be right now. That was just amusing. I wasn't prepared for. So if someone wants to go mess with that and come back with a solution, be my guest. Be my guest. But we should be able to do that. I'm kind of surprised it's not that simple, though. It should be that simple, or I'm just live coding and I shouldn't do that right now. I should keep to my plan. So 600 px. Okay, and then if we divide it into that, we get 63%. Okay, that's where we were. Sorry, that was I was excited for it to work, but that should work. That idea should work where we have a variable divided. Yeah, maybe you have to convert it into percent. I'm not really sure there. Oh, times 100. Do you have that in? Aaron, if you have an example, pop it in. Anyway, we digress. My bad. So let's go back to what we're doing here with the percent. So 63%. And then so I was going to show you why sometimes these percents don't equal exactly what we want. So I'm going to come in here and I'm going to say, let's get these to be 50% equivalents, right? So let's go look at that 50%. Now, we talked about this in the video, but I want to actually just go way deeper here and say inline block. So inline block, remember, is a display type of any box model object, or an element, I should say. And these should be stacked next to each other if this was exactly true. But remember, we talked about how the border gets in the way. And there's some other funky stuff going on, probably with CodePen. Because if we take the border out, now there's nothing in the box model to prevent us from actually stacking. And so there's something else going on there. But if we do this, if we do 49%, we actually get our equivalency that we wanted. Now notice that we've got this kind of gap right here, right? So we can do 49.5 to get closer. 49, let's go all the way to 49.9. So that breaks. 49.8, 49.7. Okay. So this space, well, so Michael, the space between the divs and the HTML, like this space right here, doesn't matter. And so when we mess with percentages, it actually kind of compounds on itself. So watch this. As I go down to this thing, look, it actually breaks right here. So 49.7% still is not a valid all the way down to phone. So it'd be like 49.6. And so then we go down here, up, and it breaks again. So really 49.5 is going to be our winner down to phone to get that percentage. So 49.5% is going to be pretty close, but that's why I usually live in whole numbers. And then I'll account for that in margin, right? So Amanda, you're saying if we connect the divs, that's interesting. You're saying if we do that? Let's go see. I want to see if that works. Let's get rid of the pixel. And if we get these divs, it's like even this white space, I wonder. Oh my gosh, that's fascinating. So usually white space isn't accounted for anything. Like it's even in the description of HTML. I wonder if that's cross-browser. Let me go see Firefox. I'll just go look at it really quick. That's true. We did display inline block. So I wonder if we were doing this in Flexbox or if we were using floats. I wonder how that would be. So let's get rid of inline block really quick, and let's do float left, and then let's introduce the white space back in. Oh yeah, so it's definitely related to inline block. I got to admit, using inline block and stuff, I just never use that stuff anymore because of Flexbox. Like that's just a remnant of a couple of years of not doing it anymore. So that's my bad for not using inline block very much anymore at all. But that's really cool. That's a really cool learning right there. So, and of course, if you float left, it's taking it outside of the flow, and so this is going to work really well as well with float. So that's awesome. Let's reintroduce the 1px border. That's interesting. So, oh, because we're floating. That's why it's outside the box. It's kind of funny. Anyway, we're messing around with like display inline block. And we're messing around with white space. This stuff's really cool. I really like this stuff. So, but let's focus on nesting another 2 boxes inside of another box. So let's go ahead. Everybody, let's do this together. So I want everybody to jump on with me. Oh, nice. Okay, let's put that in real quick. Oh, interesting. So wait, do we have, oh, so Travis used, oh wait, we have Max. Oh, okay, you just use different variable names. Interesting, and both of you use different parentheses as well. That's funny. You both came up with different examples. Looks like they both work though. That's really cool. So it looks like we have to use parentheses in combination with variables in combination with multiplication. So check that out. That's really cool. So check this out. And by the way, you're totally allowed to do this. Like this is not a hack. This is legit what Aaron and Travis put up. But you can take this. Oh, it looks like this is only visible to me. That's interesting. So you can take what Aaron wrote down and you could apply that throughout the rest of your website if you don't want to do the math. Like I'm okay with that. I think that's a really cool way to approach it, because then you can just hard code pixels and put that. That's really cool, because then you can go to your sketch file, you can go to your Photoshop file that you're given from the designer, just take the exact number and pop it in, and it's just going to automatically work. I love that stuff. Very cool. And let me put it in here just in case someone's watching this video and doesn't have reference to the Slack channel. I gotta remember that. Sorry. So what we would do is let's put it into our box. So basically, this is what we were just chatting about. And then we're going to make a variable called parent size. And so what would probably be better to say like website width or something. I don't know. I mean, I don't know. Maybe that's too robust, but something that's going to help the next developer know. So in this case, by the way, PX or no PX in the variable name, in the variable container, I should say. No PX. Okay, I figured. So now what we'll do is we'll say website width, parent size, 500. Am I missing something? Website width. Oh, I have double semicolons. What else am I missing here? Oh, width. Awesome. Okay, so half of 800 is what? 400. And then, of course, because I'm using display inline block, go up here, take this out. Oh, what the heck? That's interesting. 400 divided by website width multiplied by 100. That is really crazy. You guys seeing that? That's really interesting. That's not that white space is causing that kind of funkiness. Is there a parenthesis that, oh, you know what? Maybe it's this. Is it this that needs to be like that? No. No need percent near 100. Let's try 399. 396. So again, we have that same problem. Oh, because of this thing. I don't know. That's weird. But at least we have this tool now, right? And I'm willing to submit that if somebody wanted to take even more time on this, you could make a sweet little mix-in that would take all this stuff and abstract it out. And then you could probably have something like this, you know, a mix-in that's like responsive. And then you just pass your variables into it. So that's a little challenge if somebody wants to do that right now. That'd be pretty slick. Okay, less is awesome. I want you to understand that the reason I went CSS with this stuff is because the new curriculum is going to be teaching this in the first week. We won't have less. So that's why we didn't have awesome less stuff baked into this previously. This was meant to be like a standard CSS lesson. So just that's a disclaimer. Okay. I'm going to save this. I'm going to give it to everybody since we have it working now. And we should be good to go. All right, let's talk about putting two boxes inside of box one and what that looks like, because this really is the next level of what we want to accomplish. So I'm going to copy and paste box one and box two inside of box one. I'm not going to use the same class names, so I'm going to say child box, because we don't want them to be the same. I'm going to give it some separation so it's not so hard to read. And then I'm going to say child box one, child box two. Okay, so now we have our children boxes inside of our parent boxes. So now what we're going to do is we're going to go introduce our specificity again by saying, well, now that we have, I guess now that we have less, we could just nest it nicely, but what am I doing? Box, child, wow, why did I do that? Child box. Okay, so child box is going to have similar functionality. Let's try to get like 50% boxes again. And check this out. That was so freaking awesome with that little ditty right there. But let's talk about this for a second. And then let's get the children boxes. Different color. So just pay attention to how crazy this is to write all this compared to our awesome less stuff that we were doing. Okay, so let's just change our backgrounds to something that's easy to see. Let's go gray. Okay, so box, child box, so box, child box. And then this is going to be box one. Oh, sorry, it's not a child of it. It's just a sibling of it. So I should just do this. Rip, because they're siblings. Okay. Let's see. So box one is got bigger, obviously, because it has children in it. And it's just accounting for it because we didn't specify a height. So it's just like, here's my children inside. Box two is over here. And these are maintaining their percents. So let's go and see what happens. We have the same kind of problem going on here with the percents, but everything else is still fully responsive, which is super nice. So let's look at child box one and child box two. and check out how these work. Oh yeah, I have box in there. What the heck? Okay. All right. So with our child boxes, it's interesting because what we're doing right here is this variable of website width is going off of 800, right? Now this can be, this makes sense right now, it's working, but really what we should be doing is going off of our parents containing width. So in this case, this could be kind of interesting because this works great off of the parent, but now this creates a new variable that needs to be used down here because it's going to be the containing box. So this piece right here. Now, the reason that this works, by the way, is because we're using the same dimensions, right? We're doing 50%. So that's why it works. That's why these two look like, it seems like it's working. But let's say that we wanted to have this one be 30% and this one be 40%. This would no longer work because we'd be using the website width and we need to use the parent's width. So that's why really this next step is the last thing to really grasp, and then you'll get it. So right here, let me explain what I'm saying. We can't, let's say that this one needs to be box one, the child box right here. Let's say child box one needs to be I chose horrible class names, you guys. I'm gonna just delete these. They're just, that was dumb of me. So child box one and child box, oh my goodness, child box two. Okay, so this is actually more realistic. So what we're going to do is we're just going to say if we know the value of this variable, right? So right now, yeah, there's so much inception when you go down. Like you're getting a dream within a dream within a dream, and so as I'm doing this, I'm going, yeah, this probably isn't a great idea because now we have to think about this, and we'd have to keep that variable for this. And so now we need to know what exactly is this width so that we can divide into it. And if we're just using like the old example of 600 divided, like 400, well, that's our number, right? So 396. So let's say that it's 396. So I'm now going to say, I'm going to use the old tried and true formula, which is the child into the parent. Let's say that I want this one to be 30%, and I want this one to be 70%. Okay, so now take this for a second, and I want you to tell me, just first person to put it in there, tell me what this width should be for child box one, and tell me what the width should be for child box two. Ready, go. So this to be 30, so green should be 30%, gray should be 70%. What is the number going to be? So Eric asks a valid question. He says, why not like second width is now assigned the value of this value? Because we're just going to get deeper and deeper into creating a bunch of variables that are used for second width, when in reality, it's just going to be 20%, 30%, 40%. And those will be very easy to read too. So, it's a good question though. Why not? I mean, it's because you're going to have so much little tiny equations everywhere. So, but again, if we could take time to think about this and like build a mix in, I think that could be legit. So, so yeah, Aaron, that would work, right? If you know the parent elements percentage, then you can just put it in, right? Like you can just say, I want this to be 30% of my parent. So that is actually the answer. Because if we already know the percent that we want to go in, I'm sorry, I kind of messed with you there. You can just put in 30%, right? Like I wanted somebody to say, Josh, you already know your percents, right? So put them in. Now, if I'd given you pixel values, then you could have run the equation, right? Sorry, I was messing with you a little bit. So you need to understand that if the designer comes in and you actually don't know the percents, so usually the designer is going to give you a number that's like, okay, this one needs to be 130 px, and this one needs to be 20 px. Then you could actually do your math, right? Otherwise, you could do the opposite math to find out, well, what is 70% of the containing element? So think about what I just said, that if you know the percents, you just type them in, duh. But if you don't know the percents, you have to run that little equation again, okay? So in this case, it really is, what does the designer want? Find those pixels, divide the child into the parent. That is like responsive percent-based layouts to the T. The thing that gets tricky is when you introduce what you've experienced yesterday, which was flexbox and floats and display inline block. And how do these all work together in tandem while you're actively just making everything a percent-based layout, right? So that is really like this little concept right here is the concept. Like this is fluid design 101 as far as like how to get started and get going. The hard stuff is when you combine this with like, okay, I got a flex box that's got 600 px. I change it to 40%, and now I have to deal with what that new reality looks like, right? Like that. I know you experienced that yesterday, and I could tell, brains were churning hard on that one. Now we're going to introduce even more brain churning right now into the project by saying, okay, now the goal is 100% fluid layout. So that is the goal, by the way. So let's talk about what that's going to look like. Before we do that, are there any questions? Because by the way, after this, it's the same thing, right? So if we put more children inside of this child, it's just the same thing over and over. We've developed a pattern, right? So we have a pattern that we've read. And by the way, programming is just pattern after pattern after pattern. So always try to find the pattern and then just mimic it over and over. That's math, right? And so in this case, now you could repeat this pattern again and do it again, right? And so if you wanted to push yourself, go ahead and try that, put 2 more children inside that box. But the point has been made, which is that the formula that we've pinned is for sure good. We also know that we have access because of the luxury of preprocessors that we could actually use variables to hold values for us. But I really want you to get the concept, like without variables, without mix-ins. I just want you to get the concept that it's child divided into parent, right? As far as the math goes, multiplied by 100. So you're going to get your percents that way. Okay, didn't you want those next to each other? No, I didn't necessarily want them pairy next to each other, because if I did, I would just do this, right? I would just do 49, 49, and then I would display block or inline block on them again. But in this case, I was just showcasing that, 70 and 30, we already knew the numbers, right? But if we wanted to take 20, like if I wanted this to be accurate to a designer that says, okay, 20, then I would have to say 20 divided into 396, which would be 0.05 or 5%, right? So then this would be 5% if I was following some pretend designer, because 396 was the parent's width. Any other questions before we jump into the assignment guide? Yeah, Nathan, you're totally getting it. You're totally getting that. But you're gonna find that simple theory um, is gonna blow your mind after you get like 3 or 4 divs deep. You're gonna have to remember this pattern. And we're gonna have a little like I said, inception. Let's see, box, child box is useless. Box, child box. Oh no, it's yeah, I think this one is useless up here. Why do we even have that? Yeah, sorry, that was just a remnant of my musings. Yeah, that's a great way. We are essentially doing so. Nathaniel says we are essentially doing percentages of the percentage. That's a great way to think of it. But if I said that to you at the beginning, you'd go, "What?" Like I think you have to experience it a little bit before you grasp what a percentage of a percentage means. Tommy, I agree with that. I like to put borders around stuff too, but as you can see, borders mess with things as well. So Tommy said, someone told me the easiest way to work on things is to put a background color on everything. I do that like right here. I'm doing it. So I think that's a good idea to lay things out. Just remember to delete the background color. You'll be fine. Yes, David, I will post that code pen. And I'll put this code pen in the YouTube description as well. That's weird. I hit save and then the little screenshot showing the crappier one. So sorry about that. But I'll put this, so anybody that's watching this video later, I will make sure this code pen makes it to the description. Any other questions that I can answer? Hopefully you guys are going, yeah, this is easy, but man, I got to think about the layout. I got to think about how does this impact everything else. Okay, the question is asked by Aaron. Is there a way to do a layout where the percentage is based on the whole page instead of its container? Yeah, of course, but never do that. Never do that. Position absolute. Funny story. When I first started developing, I was like, I hate display inline block. I hate floats. I hate clears. And Flexbox didn't exist. And so one of my first websites I built was 100% position absolute. Well, position absolute doesn't give a rip about what's around it in the viewport and stuff. And so if you tried to zoom in or zoom out, it would just blow up everything. So position absolute is not a great way to go because it's relative to its parent's position. So I actually reserve position absolute for very few things in websites that are very, like, I avoid absolute positioning like the plague because it's not going to listen to the stuff around it. So I try to relatively position using Flexbox and box model. Okay, anything else? Michael, you are 100% correct. But if no parent has explicitly been assigned relative, it'll just keep going. So I want to talk about that actually. I feel like a lot of developers don't get this concept. So we have a parent typing, man. Bad day for typing. So sorry. Okay. So we have our parent element. I'm just like typing my thoughts right now. I'm so sorry. So I'm going to say background gray, width 400 px, height 400 px. We just boxes for days. So here's our box. Here's our parent box. No, Aaron, if I did speech recognition software, oh man, that'd be even worse. All right, now we have a child. So we have child right down here. And we're just going to decrease the width to, let's make them a small child, and we'll make it green so we can see it against the gray. All right, here's our 2 boxes. Now, the problem is I think a lot of people don't understand about absolute positioning is that if you don't actually explicitly say position relative on the parent element, it will actually go to the top left of the next element that has that explicitly is said. So what I mean by that is, watch this. Position, oh my gosh, absolute. So right now, nothing's happening, right? But now I'm going to say top 30px, left 30px. And so it moved, right? That seems right. But what you don't know is that because this parent has not had it explicitly stated, this box, this green box, is actually listening to the viewport. So what I'm going to do is I'll put a margin on this, say 500px or something. Well, it's way too big, but there, you can see the parent just went over here and the child's like, peace out, I'm staying with the viewport. And that is because you didn't explicitly say position relative on the parent. So now I have to say position relative, and the little baby goes home to its mama box. Does that make sense, everybody? Like, you have to understand that if you're going to use absolute positioning. Otherwise, you're going to be in a world of hurt. Yep, baby and mama. Just think about everything as a child and a parent. It's interesting. Like, I don't know what you don't know, right? Like, I assume you know certain things. And so these little tips and tricks, I think, go a really long way, even though they weren't planned. So I hope you appreciate them as well. I didn't plan to talk about this. So I would, by the way, I would use absolute positioning. It is relative to our conversation for the assignment. But I would use absolute positioning to position like a button inside of an image, or I would use absolute positioning to move something around that needs to be very specific to a design element. And that is it. So I would say 2 or 3 items ever in a web page or app are absolutely positioned. I would say that, again, I say I avoid it like the plague when I used to do 100%. Because you're just not going to have that responsive goodness that you need. Let's see. How do you say keep a nav bar on top of the screen while scrolling? Well, that would be position fixed. So if we had enough content, oh man, it's going to be a lot of breaks, but let's do it. See if the scroll bar pops in. No. I could just make a giant fat div down here. Well, tall, right? That's what my mom always said. You're tall, you're not fat. My mama loves me. That's why she said that. Okay, height 900px. Oh wow, somehow a string got in there. So notice how, oh sorry, let me give you a background color. Okay, so see how this thing goes with it. So fixed sticks to the top of the page based on you calling it position fixed. I would also like to note that because you explicitly put fixed in here, you automatically get the benefits of relative for absolute position children. So notice how the green child, baby Hulk over here, right there, baby Hulk had stayed inside of here because we actually declared a position. So that's a really big deal. If I took that off, obviously it wouldn't be position fixed, but it would go back to the top left of the screen. So if I take this off, Let's make this one like purple so we can see everything. So if I take off position fixed, baby Hulk's back up here. So we have to come back here and introduce fixed. And yeah, I just hit tab, sorry, by the way. So I don't know which one you were talking about, but usually I just hit tab and Emmet's got it covered. That's what the back end is, or the thing's called Emmet usually. Okay, just in case you wanted that, we'll say position absolute. I really do think this is relevant though. Like, I don't think what I just talked about was like way out of topic. You have to fight with these things in your challenge today. Like, you have to fight with yourself and say, okay, because I use percent based layout, okay, do I need to use absolute positioning here? And the answer is don't use absolute positioning unless you absolutely have to. I'm thinking about the assignment right now. I don't think I even have one absolute position item in there. You'll have to call me out on it, but they're just super finicky, and they need to have this kind of relationship. So anyway, let me get rid of tall div because I think this really demonstrates everything more than anything else. So that is the absolute positioning exercise we just did. Okay, we have a little bit of time to discuss the assignment challenge project. Sorry, I call it all sorts of things. Understand that what I want you to do is this is preparing you for the sprint challenge tomorrow. And the sprint challenge tomorrow will basically be to rebuild a layout from scratch using less and making it fully responsive. So that's going to be the sprint challenge. Okay. But tonight, why is everybody so sad? What's going on? You guys are funny. The challenge for today is just going to get you. You can do that. It's fine. The challenge for today is just going to help you get that percent-based layout mentality down. So what you're going to do is you're going to take your current code base that you've already spent tons of time on yesterday, and you're going to use that one. But now you're going to introduce percents. And so you can never, so the only rule is you cannot have a width or a padding or a margin that is a fixed pixel. They all have to be converted into percents. The other part of the challenge, don't worry, I'm going to write this all down and give it to you, but the other part of the challenge is to convert all of your fonts into rems, just the font sizes. Yeah, Jonathan, just so you know, in the real world, you will be on the same code base, potentially for years. So 1 week is very fast, actually. Okay, sorry, too evil. Let's go and look at the old code base that we just know and love. Let's see here. Just evil enough. Yeah, I got to throw a moi. Okay. So here is our favorite friend, innovation on demand. Great idea. So the interesting thing about this is that you've already done the media query work. So again, inspect elements, and let's kind of play around with this. Man, I'm debating going full screen just so we can get the full gambit, but my screen's too big. Let's just try it. Let's just see if it's worth doing. All right. So here's the full screen. I don't know if you can cope actually. So here we go. Now that we can actually see everything, I'll just show you how I kind of build things. So I like to build with, this is all zoomed in like crazy, holy cow. So here's my responsive web design assignment that was given yesterday, right? You're going to use your same code base. we're just going to introduce those two new gotchas when they're big ones, which are every set width needs to go away, and every set margin and padding needs to go away and turn into a percent. And then, of course, you have to replace any font size. You have to replace it with rem and make sure it looks the same as the original. So that is the challenge. And as far as the pull request goes, you can actually already include your pull request and then just keep requesting into the same pull request. So TA-wise, we'll just use the same pull request they've already done for last time. And then they can just introduce new commits with this stuff in there. Just hopefully that'll keep it easier for you. If not, just DM me and we can talk about it. Okay. So for example, let's talk about top and bottom really quick. So margin bottom, can everybody see that, by the way? I'll move this over so I can read the chat. Is this readable or legible?
Looks good.
Okay, thanks. And then let me get to some questions after I get some principles talked about. So margin top, margin bottom, anything that goes vertical. So anything that goes up or down, never do that in a percent. In my early careers, I'm like, oh, percentages are the best. But when you start messing with percent based on up and down, you are now dealing with crazy people like you and me trying to mess around with browsers. So like some people look at browsers like this, some people look at browsers like that, et cetera, right? And so if you try to build off of a percentage of height, you are in for a world of just horrible pain. So don't do it. Like it's not standard. It's not good practice. Don't use percentages for height. Because every time they resize their browser, it's going to jack everything up. So that should make sense to you. Okay, I'm seeing some good questions and I want to address them. Like, so don't use VH either. Well, you can use VH for like the big pieces of the layout, but I would recommend to not use VH outside of like setting up the background image, because how often do you actually need to use the full height of the screen? So when you're messing with people's like lives, like this is an accessibility thing. Like when you're basically saying you have to use the browser a certain way if you try to introduce height. So that's why we just let the scroll bar do it for us. That's the standard right now. But of course, there's some bleeding edge innuendo that'll say it differently. But in the real like marketing kind of make money on websites world, you don't want to mess with what they already know. Let's see. Nope, it's not a new branch. It's going to be the same repo. You're just going to make a commit that says, so remember, every time you make a commit, you're going to make changes, and then you'll push that commit up and have a commit message or something that'll say, fluid responsive or whatever you want to say. We can get more technical about it if you want. That's kind of I just want you to focus on percents and rems more than anything. Okay. Aaron he says, so what we're learning is only useful if we want to make money. No, that's I know you jest, but I know because I know you want to make money with this. But at the same time, you can goof around with VHs. Like I have no problem with that. You should I encourage you to try to mess around with VHs, and then you'll see how crazy they are and how it makes you sad inside. So go ahead and do that. John says, where do we set the 62.5%? So right here on HTML body, we could do font size, and we would do the 62.5%. Now remember that magical number is coming because, this is my last file. Sorry. I forgot where I am. So I'm going to do a comment here and say 62.5%. That is the number, the magical percentage that will make 16px into a base of 10px. So that makes it a lot easier, right? Because then you can say, okay, so let's go find the font size 16 right there. So main content font size. So in chat, tell me what that would be in rems based on this percentage. What would 16px be? Oh, good. So we actually have confusion. So 1 rem is the answer, right? No, it's not, right? Because 16 is 10. So 1.6 or 1. Which one is it, guys? Think about this. 16px into a base of 10px. So 1 rem would be, it'd be 1.6, right? So 1.6, that's the answer. Because it's 1 is 10, right? And then 0.6 is 6. So 16px, 10, 1.6. See, I'm good. I'm really glad that we actually are discussing this, because even seeing this confusion makes me go, okay, cool. Now we at least addressed that once. So I know a lot of you said different answers. I actually love that. We're seeing some good thinking here. Okay. Oh, hold up. We're confused. So remember, 16 is the base of every browser that is currently in existence, to my knowledge. So like Chrome, Safari, and all the big ones, they have a base of font size of 16. Well, what we do is we'll take 62.5% of 16, and that drops it down to 10 pixels equivalent. And so if we have a font size set to 1 rem, that's going to be 10px, right? But if we have 1.6, that will equate to 16 pixels. Oh, let's see. Sarah, she always has awesome Pinterest stuff. Oh, wow. This is like a legit. Yeah, go read that. Does everybody understand what I just wrote down up here? 1.6 equates to 16px because of our 62.5%. This stuff really is hard to like wrap your head around once, but once you get it, you don't forget it. Like you're just like, oh, that totally makes sense. Okay, so let's move on. We have about 10 minutes to discuss how you would actually turn these widths into percents. So here's our first big concern, right? We have width 880px. This is like our main container width. So remember, what we need to do is convert our biggest one, like our biggest container, into max width, right? And then we also need to introduce width 100% for everything else. Oops, inside of it. That's how we get that fluidness. So we have to have both of these values. And if you don't do this, you will have a bad time. So make sure you're doing this like right now if you have your project open. So width 100%, max width 886. Okay. So this is the base of like what you need to be successful for today's challenge. So these are the two things: font size 62.5% on your HTML body selector, and then your container max width 880 with 100. At this point, you are now equipped to use rems and to start messing around with your percents. It's that simple. As I realize it's not that simple, like you need to understand this stuff. So right now you'll notice that when we get down to this percent, it actually looks really nice because I hit that breakpoint. And so we want to have this kind of experience where it's like nice and adjusting on our desktop, like so this scroll bar goes away and we have a really good experience with everything from giant to all the way down to the phone. This thing should just hum as far as elements not running into each other Everything's percent-based layout. That's the goal. Now, images are something I want to address. So if we inspect this element right here, this image currently does not have any styles attached to it. And so the problem is you have to figure out what you want to do with images. What I mean by that is some people will just say width 100% and then give it a parent, right? And so now our image is going to be changing its size. See that? And in this case, it's a bad thing because it's adjusting to the Flexbox setting. And so you have to look at that. That's one of the pieces of the challenge. Now you might have rearranged things to look differently, but this is how mine looks. And so I'm going, yeah, I got to make sure I look at my Flexbox and make sure that this thing's not stretching out because of that. So that is a challenge. This is images, setting them to 100%. I'll give you another link on how to approach images, by the way. There's a really good read I want everybody to have. I'll do that after I get the video done. So I'm going to put all the CodePen links that we've worked on today. I'll provide a couple other links to help you manage images because we have 1, 2 images, 3 images that we have to make sure we account for. And in other websites, there's like 45. So this is just baby Hulk steps. All right. So that, my friends, you are now equipped to accomplish the goal. Let me just put it in writing for the TAs. I'm still trying to figure out how to do this. Emily's probably going to hate me, but I'll just make a new README. I'm sorry, Emily. I really am. But the idea is going to be to accomplish the challenge, change all hard-coded widths to percent, and then change all font sizes to rem units. That is the challenge. It's going to be a tough one because there's just so much you have to think about. The max width stuff, by the way, that applies. Let me make sure I'm under that. Let's see. Oh yeah, I've got another computer I'm working on, or another display as well, Aaron. I'm a nerd. I got to nerd out. Let's see. Okay, so to make sure, let's look at this right here. Remember, borders do not use percentages. They do use M's, by the way, but don't worry about messing with your borders right now. Just keep them pixels. Margin, so top, I would leave that alone. Right, okay, that's 0, so no big deal. Top right, bottom, no worries. Left, so this one you don't need to worry about. Padding, top, don't need to worry about it. Font size, you do need to worry about it, so change it to a rem, right? Line height, by the way, line height is supposed to be unitless, so we shouldn't even be putting in px. We should just be putting in a number, and that number should handle itself. So I apologize for putting px's on line heights. That was just probably in my fervor to write this stuff down, but line heights are unitless as a best practice. Main content. So right there, I just basically converted my challenge. Like I'm doing the challenge correctly. I've just converted that chunk. So if you're kind of like if you like to have little tasks, you get overwhelmed by the big picture. That's like me. Just take each selector and just attack each selector. Just maybe for 45 minutes, just go and try to knock out one page, right? Or two or three, depending on how big it is. Remember, this is super tiny. It's one web page, so don't kill yourself over this, but understand that if you would just attack it one selector at a time and just convert the selector and then go and make sure that it looks good when you're done, you're going to be just fine. Now, I don't have all the media query work that you guys did. Like you did so much media query work yesterday. So you need to make sure that you're updating your media queries as well to include that percent. Maybe you went in there and you did a really good job of updating your media queries to percentages, so you're already done with that. But like right here, I have a margin of 20px. Well, remember, if you have one item, the shorthand version is top right, bottom left. So I actually need to change this to 20px. And then I need to go find out what is that percent of 20? Like, is it going to be 4%? Like, that would be the correct solution right there. So remember, anything that's left or right, anything that's horizontal needs to be converted into a percent, and anything that's top and bottom does not. Now, there are some things that are so small that even on desktop, they don't need to be converted. So for example, if we had a width on this about tag right there, if we had a set width and we had like another element right here and it was super tiny, because it's so tiny, no matter if you went from desktop to tablet to, well, that thing's going nuts, to phone, you wouldn't have to update that. And so there is exception to the rule always, just like anything in life, there is an exception to the rule. And when it comes to percent-based layouts, that exception is super tiny stuff that you don't even need to mess with the percent, because then it would get too tiny, right? And it wouldn't be worth it. And by the way, if things are getting too tiny and you don't want them to go extremely, extremely tiny, you can introduce a minimum width as well. So you can say min width 200, which means never go below 200. So max width and min width are your best friends when it comes to constraining proportion in a percent-based layout. Min width and max width are your best friends when it comes to constraining proportion. I've repeated it because it's that important. Okay. Let's see, Aaron. Will we still have breakpoints? Absolutely, yeah. Yeah, I guess I'm not clear enough, but I just said you should use your project from yesterday, which was all about breakpoints, right? So 100% use breakpoints. That is the goal, right? Fluid responsive design. The fluid flavor is breakpoints plus percent. So just keep that in your head. No, it's okay, Aaron. I'm glad you asked. I'm sure other people are thinking that. Okay, let me go make sure I didn't miss any really good questions as far as like, I would hate if I just pieced out. Let's see. Julian, so could you wrap all your subclass in your main content file under main content nested? It looks clean how you have it, but I'm not sure how we should or shouldn't nest. Remember, I don't have my last nesting on this. This is just the CSS base. I just have my nested media queries here. So it's up to you how you want to do it. That's a naming convention thing. So this was just me goofing around, on different videos. So I would say, yes, you could wrap all your subclasses inside of main content, like top content, middle, bottom. You could nest them all if you wanted to. If you're into BEM, then you could look at the naming convention there and incorporate that instead of nesting like that deep. Okay. Yes. All the readings, videos, and Piazza. Yeah, I'll assign Patrick to do that. LOL, Patrick. Let's see. We're going to go over min width. So min width, we went over yesterday. Remember? We can go over it again right this second. So let's do the simple box again. Okay, so width, let's say 500 px. Height, we'll do 200 so we can see something. And then we'll do a background of green. Awesome. Okay, so let's actually put both in here, David. I think that's a good idea to explore both. So max width, let's say actually our percentage is 100 or 100%. Let's live in the world that we have to live in today, right? I can't even type 100. So there's 100, right? Sweet. In fact, let me zoom in on this since we're done with the projects share, because I know it's really hard to see. Now you can see why I freak out every time I try to share something. Okay, so width, height, background green. Now let's watch this. If I say max width at 800 px, it's going to cut it off at 800. See that? Like, you have to understand that, right? Like, that one's pretty clear. What's not so clear is min width. So min width, we're going to say 500 px. Notice that nothing visibly changed here, right? Nothing. But as we scroll down and we get down to 500, watch what happens. 500, the scroll bar comes back. See that scroll bar? Wow, holy cow, that's hard to see. Let me make this a bigger number. So 700. So there's an invisible gap right here of 100 pixels, right where my mouse is, right? And as soon as we hit that gap, we're going to see that scroll bar pop in. There it is. See that? And so minimum width says you will never be smaller than the number I tell you to be. So minimum width, no matter what, will reintroduce the scroll bar, no matter how percent base layout you are. So minimum width says never ever get smaller than this number. Does that make sense, David? Yeah, that's another way of putting it, Travis. I like that. Simply prevents it from shrinking past a certain point. I like that. Very good. Well said. Okay. I need you guys to go get lunch and chill out. Just enjoy life a little bit. So I'm going to stop the video, and then I'm going to let it take 40 years to compile, and then I'll put it on YouTube, including all the links. So remember, the assignment is to convert to percents and use rems for font sizes, and it's going to prepare you for your sprint challenge. So get excited for that. Get hype. I'll see you at the Q&A. Other than that, I'll be blacked out for a little while as far as communications go. So talk to your TAs in their respective channels, and I'll talk to you later. Thanks a lot.